Ahem. Nobody panic. He's back. Hey everyone, this is Syntax, and I know what you're all thinking. Where in the flying fuck, where on earth have I been? Well, while I was gone, I may or may not have clocked around 360-ish hours on Mortal Kombat 1, but that's neither here nor there, okay? For a multitude of reasons that I'm not going to get into right now, I decided to take a break, but I'm back, I'm better than ever. New year, new me, hamana hamana hamana. Before I actually posted my most recent video, I was just sitting in my room thinking, I don't even know what I would post as my quote-unquote comeback video. I had no idea, and I was sitting in my room scrolling through Twitter, or I guess it's X now, and then I saw it. Fortnite x Lego. It was everywhere. Fortnite was collabing with Lego, and I was like, wait a minute. I think I have an idea. I hopped on Google, looked up a couple models of a Lego Crackshot, saw this, and I was like, oh yeah. That's what we're doing. Funnily enough, this is actually now my most popular YouTube short, which really makes no sense because I went a couple months without posting anything on shorts or anything at all, and then that just blows up for no reason. But yeah, then the self-assembling Lego Crackshot was born. Like I just said, it's somehow my most popular YouTube short. It's my third highest liked tweet of all time, and UEFN Hub actually reposted it, and it almost got like 900 likes. It's doing really well for whatever reason. Also, just as a quick disclaimer, that Lego Crackshot model is not originally my creation. When I looked it up on Google, I wanted to see if I could find the original creator, and sure enough, I think he goes by Steen on Twitter. I'll put his actual username so you can follow it, but yeah, Steen made it. When I made the post on Twitter, I tagged him, and I didn't think he was active anymore, but as soon as I posted it, he was the first person to interact with it, first person to retweet it, first person to like it. He commented, he was like, this is super cool. I was like, yeah man, as soon as I saw your model on the internet, I was like, I have to recreate this in UEFN. I asked him how long ago he had actually made the original Lego Crackshot model, and he said it was over 3 years ago. So I'd imagine for him, one day just waking up to a notification and seeing that someone remade his model in Fortnite that was over 3 years old must have been pretty cool. But yeah, after I posted that video on YouTube and Twitter, there was a handful of people that were wondering how I actually made the whole thing, the Legos, the animation, everything that went into it, and that's exactly what this video is here for today. So for the very small percentage of you wondering what went into creating this artistic build, I'm not going to go into insane detail regarding everything that I did, but I will try to vaguely cover the step-by-step process that I used to create the self-assembling Lego Crackshot. And of course, you guys know me, you know that I pretty much start all of my projects completely from scratch. So the first step in this multi-step process was actually modeling slash sculpting each individual Lego piece that I was going to be using for this build. As I'm sure you can imagine, I don't have every Lego piece ever made memorized, but luckily most of them are just one Google search away from a fairly accurate reference image. Luckily, with the right descriptor words like smooth, tall, flat, and the dimensions, so 2x2, 4x4, whatever I would have needed, I was able to find pretty much every piece and what it should look like on both the top and the bottom of those pieces. The first Lego I actually finished building was the little 1x1 flat piece, and that's because I wanted to have that as a reference for how big I needed the other pieces to be. I can't remember exactly what I went with, but I think it was 20 width, 20 depth, and like 5 height. All I know is whatever dimensions I chose, I made it so that when I had my grid selected on the 1 snap option and I moved it exactly 1 snap, it lined up so that there was just a tiny gap between the Legos and it looked really good. I spent a lot of time sort of just analyzing the reference image, thinking to myself, okay, I see a 1x1 here, a 1x2 here, a 1x4 here, I see smooth pieces, I see rounded pieces. I was just taking in all this information for all the pieces that I thought I would need. I ended up sculpting 27 unique individual Lego pieces, and the entire thing, once it was all thrown together, ended up being 136 total, which if you think about it, that really isn't that bad. I mean, animating it was a different story, but just building it was really fun. Some of the pieces I made actually only ended up being used once in the entire build. Like the top of his hat and the piece that held the hat together, those only showed up once, and his eyes, his hands, his shoulders, those only showed up twice. So while those pieces weren't used nearly as much as like the 1x1s and the 1x2s, they were still just as fundamentally important to making the sculpt look finished. After just a few hours of building all the pieces I needed and using the reference image to assemble them in a way that looked relatively accurate, I ended with a completely finished untextured model. I didn't actually get any pictures of it when it was untextured, but you can just imagine the entire thing being covered in this gray and white checker pattern. Anyway, once I had the model looking how I wanted it, the next step in the process was actually texturing the thing. Now, I don't know a lot about materials, but I know enough to get a few things done in some capacity. In other words, I hopped on ambientcg.com to grab a white plastic texture that I thought most resembled what a Lego looks like. I then took all the nodes and plugged them in how I know to plug them in. Again, not overly complicated, but it was enough to get the job done. I'm not sure how many colors this thing everything was comprised of. All I know is I made a bunch of material instances and just assigned the colors that I needed to them, including the pinks, the yellows, the whites, the blacks, plugged them into every single piece in the build, and sure enough, there was my fully finished textured model. That whole process of downloading the material, plugging in the nodes, and then assigning all those colors to all those different pieces was actually the easiest part in the entire build. Unfortunately, after that, it was all downhill from there. The next step in the process, and by far the most difficult, was making the animation. I had no idea how I was going to make this animation. The only thing that I did know was that I wanted it to somewhat resemble the original LEGO Star Wars, in the sense that when you built something in that game, all the pieces sort of just flew into place. And that's all I knew. I just wanted to have a seemingly random pile of Legos that when you went up to it and interacted with it, they just started to sort of assemble themselves. So I thought to myself, okay, I have all 136 pieces of this model assembled, looking exactly how I want them to look, exactly where I want them to be. And then I got an idea. If you didn't know, when you're using UEFN, everything that you place inside the map, everything that was there by default when you opened it, has a set X, Y, and Z coordination and a set rotation that is relative to how it was when you originally placed it. This, of course, also stands true for the pieces that I just placed to make this Crackshot model. Can you see where I'm going with this? How I looked at it was that all these pieces that come together to form this LEGO Crackshot model were currently in their end state. This is what I would want them to look like after the LEGO had assembled itself. So then I thought, okay, if I could just take down the coordinates and rotation of every single piece in this model, then I would have free range to spread them out however I wanted. And that's exactly what I did. I renamed every single piece in this model just relative to where it was on the body, whether it was a part of the main body or his arms, his hair, his hat. I gave a name to every single piece. I then went into the Notes app on my computer and made a sort of chart where you had the name of the piece, the X, Y, and Z coordinates, and the exact rotation for every single piece. Just copying over the names, coordinates, and rotations of all these pieces probably took longer than it did to actually build the thing. Anyway, after a few hours of hitting copy and paste for every piece and every coordinate and every rotation, I had what was effectively a spreadsheet of all the pieces and their end positions. So after I'd taken note of the end positions of every piece in the build, I could then move them wherever I wanted. So I just created a seemingly random pile of Legos, which is what you see right here. Now, I had thought writing down all the names, coordinates, and rotations was a tedious process. Little did I know, I was in for one hell of a treat. I mean, just to not sugarcoat it, I had to animate every keyframe of every piece for the entire thing. As I'm scrolling through here, you can see the names of all the pieces that I added to the animations, and all those little gray bars, those are the individual animations for all of the pieces. I think with the movement and the rotation of each piece being taken into consideration, there was about 15 to 20 keyframes for every single piece that had to be individually animated, so, you know, just a little over 2,000 keyframes. The average length for the animation of one of the pieces was around half a second. There were a few that were a quarter of a second and a few that were a second, but overall the average length was a half a second. Every gray bar you see there, most of them are half a second long. And then you had the average staggering between pieces, which was around 1/10 of a second, because remember, not all the pieces are flying up and going into place at once. They're sort of each taking turns. So after this piece flies up, 1/10 of a second later, this piece flies up, and then 1/10 of a second later, this piece flies up. So yeah, when you're animating the keyframes of 136 individual Lego pieces that are each staggered by about 1/10 of a second, you end up with a fully assembled Lego Crackshot at around 13 seconds into the animation. I can't even really think of a word to describe this process. Tedious doesn't do it justice. It was like mind-numbing. And of course, most of this animation was completely freehanded. The only thing that wasn't freehanded were the coordinates and rotation that I saved. So once I had the piece in a position that I felt like was okay, on the last keyframe, I could copy and paste in the coordinates and rotation, and then it would just fly into place. There's actually a button in the cinematic sequence where I can just click and it will go to the next keyframe. So you can see here, these are just all the individual keyframes of all the pieces, and you just do that for every single one, and eventually you have a really cool, smooth looking animation. Now, unfortunately, after I actually did animate all those pieces to be assembled, I ran into a bit of an issue. See, in the original LEGO Star Wars, whenever you get done building whatever it is that you're building in that moment, the finished product does a little hop at the end. And since that was my inspiration, I also wanted my LEGO to do a little hop once it was fully assembled. The problem was, at the time, I had just finished animating all of those pieces, and I really didn't want to do it again. And then I remembered that earlier in the process, before I started animating anything, I actually copied over all those Legos and merged them together to just have one LEGO Crackshot model that would only count as one piece. So if I could somehow figure out a way to move all 136 individual pieces and replace them with that finished model, then I'd have no problem having it hop because it'd just be one piece. My original idea was to have all of the pieces I used in the animation, once they were fully assembled, to just fly under the map in an instant, and then have the finished model fly up from under the map and replace all those pieces that I had originally used. I ended up not doing that because I was afraid if I had 137 moving parts all moving within like 1/100th of a second, it would cause too much lag and it'd just be too problematic. Fortunately for me, I reached out to a friend of a friend who goes by the name Zakuzo, who not only showed me how to set up translucency settings on the materials, but he also showed me a way in which I could manipulate those settings via a cinematic sequence. So essentially, both the individual LEGO pieces and the finished model are using materials that have a translucency setting set up on them. And even though you can't technically see it because the translucency setting is set to 1, the finished Crackshot model is exactly in place of where all those pieces throw themselves together, and I just have them sort of swap once everything is fully finished. Like I said a little bit earlier in the video, the animation of this guy actually building himself lasts exactly 13 seconds. So what's happening is between 13 and 13.01 seconds, all 136 individual pieces that were used to make up the LEGO Crackshot have their translucency setting turned up to 1, making them completely invisible. While that's happening, the LEGO Crackshot that is one solid piece is having its translucency setting set to 0, making it completely visible and essentially just swapping its place with all those pieces. In the video for this animation, that transition is almost impossible to see. In fact, I don't think there was anyone that caught on to what I was actually doing here. However, as you can see here, when I click back and forth between the keyframes at 13 seconds and 13.01 seconds, you can clearly see the difference between 136 individual pieces and the merged version of the LEGO Crackshot. So yeah, in short, all those pieces went invisible and the merged version became visible. And after that, it was easy to animate because it was only one piece. I could make it spin, fly, jump, do whatever I wanted. I decided to make a little sparkle effect for when it was finished because I thought that would look cool, and there's a bunch of triggers off to the side, but really these are just mostly delays for the sounds that went into the animation and then a delay for the final explosion at the end. I also made a post-process volume that over time turns red once he starts spinning and flying off. I don't really want to explain how those work because I don't fully know how they work. All I know is there's a bunch of settings that you can use to manipulate the surrounding area, and you can have its effect strength at 0 and then turn it up to 1 if you add it in a cinematic sequence, which is exactly what I did. And yeah, that was everything that went into it. Pretty cool, huh? Anyway, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Just be fully prepared for me to be more consistent. Maybe, maybe not, no promises. Even though New Year, New Me is kind of corny, I do actually want to put out some maps and some more content for you guys and actually, you know, stay on top of it. But yeah, anyway, for those of you who wanted to know how this was done, now you know everything that went into it. If you didn't really care, then I guess this video wasn't for you. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to leave a comment down below regarding what you thought about the process. And yeah, this has been Syntax. Later.